The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson is filled with all kind of massive crustaceans known as greatshells. The most enormous of these creatures are the Tai-na, which are so big that they have entire kingdoms of people living on their backs. In this video, we will explore these giant creatures' anatomy, learn how they're able to grow to such a mind-boggling size, and delve into the culture of their inhabitants, appearance, and anatomy. Tai-na are enormous town-sized greatshells that inhabit the waters of the Reshi Sea on Roshar. From afar, they look like strange, mountainous islands that jut up hundreds of feet from the water's surface. Many people encountering them for the first time are shocked when they see them move and realize that what they're looking at isn't actually a strange-looking island, but a living creature. We get to see this experience in Words of Radiance when Rysn first sees a Tai-na. The island was much bigger than she'd expected. She'd imagined it to be like a very large boat, not this towering rock formation jutting from the waters like a boulder in a field. It was different from other islands she'd seen. There didn't seem to be any beach, and it wasn't flat and low, but mountainous. Shouldn't the sides and top have eroded over time? Then the island ahead of them moved. Not in the drifting way she'd imagined. The island's very shape changed. Stones twisting and undulating, a huge section of rock rising in a motion that seemed lethargic until one appreciated the grand scale. Rysn sat down with a plop, her eyes wide. The rock, the leg, lifted, streaming water like rainfall. It lurched forward, then crashed back down into the sea with incredible force. The Tai-na, the gods of the Reshi Isles, were greatshells. As you might imagine, Tai-na legs are huge. The length of these legs isn't explicitly stated in the books, but they are long enough to reach the bottom of the Reshi Sea, which is described as being dozens of feet deep at the very least. The vast majority of a Tai-na's body is covered with a protective carapace shell. In some places, the shell splits, revealing stony skin far beneath. These splits are like chasms, so wide that a person couldn't jump across without falling in. They have whole ecosystems of plants growing on their backs that have gained footholds in the cracks between plates of their shell. These include rock buds, thick jungles of limber trees covered in drooping vines, pink and yellow mounds of shell bark, and moss that coats nearly every part of the shell. All of these plants shake with each step the beast they reside on takes. A Tai-na's shell dips down into the water at the back of the creature, forming a platform of sorts. Plates of shell hang out from this platform just above the water at various sections, and the humans who live on the Great Shell, the Reshi people, paddle boats up to these sections to climb on the shell. From this low point, the shell rises steeply, so the Reshi have carved steps into the carapace to make the task of hiking to the top of one of the creatures a little less arduous. This carving isn't thought to hurt the Tai-na. The jungles get thicker and the air becomes more humid the higher on the shell you climb. These jungles fall away completely once you make it to the head, leaving an open field with only rock buds and the vast sky beyond. The view from the head is breathtaking, though it can also be intimidating if you look down at the sea hundreds of feet below. Give this video a like if you would be brave enough to climb to the top of a Tai-na. Tai-na have glassy black eyes that are described as being as large as a house and are positioned more than 50 feet down from the top of their head. They have massive mandibles that they use to pull food towards their mouths. The Reshi sometimes feed them bundles of fruit as treats and offerings, but their primary food source is currently unknown to everyone but the Reshi. The lifespan of a Tai-na is unknown, but Brandon has said that they are very long-lived. Spren Bond. The Tai-na are by far the biggest greatshells on Roshar, making even the monstrous chasmfiends of the Shattered Plains seem like pebbles in comparison. They are so gargantuan, in fact, that the Rosharan scholar Bavamar did calculations and found that they should be crushed by their own weight, but they aren't. This is thanks to a bond that the Tai-na form with a Spren. All greatshells form bonds with Spren to allow them to grow larger than they should be able to, but usually the Spren that they bond are luck Spren, which are known as Mandra and Shadesmar. The Tai-na, however, seem to bond a different kind of Spren. Axes the Collector thinks that this Spren must be even more spectacular than the Mandra. The Reshi refer to this Spren as the soul of the Tai-na, but they don't like to speak about it to outsiders, so little is known. In Words of Radiance, One of these Spren slows the fall of Rysn, saving her life, so they seem to be both sentient and capable of interacting with the physical realm. Brandon has stated that even with this Spren Bond, it is still somewhat of a stretch that the Tai-na grow as big as they do, but since they spend their time in the Reshi Sea, buoyancy helps. He's also stated that even though they do better in the water, they could, in fact, go on land if they had the desire. I don't know about you, but I think having an island-sized crab stomping around on land is a pretty terrifying thought. Culture of the Tai-na. Although they may seem like lumbering, mindless beasts, the Tai-na are sapient creatures and have their own culture. They don't speak or think the same way humans do, but they seem to be able to communicate with their Reshi inhabitants in some way, providing them answers to problems when approached by high-status members of the society. The one Tai-na we've seen in the books, named Reluna, is said to approve of boldness and, more importantly, respect. She seems to expect her inhabitants to display these traits. Tai-na don't always get along, and sometimes when two Tai-na get close, they go to war with one another. The two island-sized creatures rage, and their inhabitants follow suit. This isn't always the case though. Sometimes good things happen when two Tai-na get close. They also form families among fellow Tai-na. One of these families is known as the Na Alind. This family of Tai-na took in the last of the Larkin during the scouring of Aemia, saving the smaller creatures from extinction. They think of the Larkin as their cousins and seem to have made a promise to protect them. Culture of the Inhabitants. The exact number of Tai-na wandering the Reshi Sea isn't known, but it's thought to be in the range of dozens to hundreds of them. Each of these island-sized creatures is home to the Reshi people who have set up independent kingdoms on their backs. The Reshi who live on the Tai-na worship them as gods. To them, the most important purpose in life is to serve their god. They view the movements of the Tai-na as divine will, and they seem to be able to predict their movements to an extent, though the Tai-na don't always follow these predicted patterns. The Reshi have straight black hair, tan skin, and rounded features. For clothing, both men and women alike traditionally wear colorful robes and tasseled overshirts with the front left open, leaving their chest bare. Other Reshi choose not to wear any clothes at all, going about as bare as the day they were born. This seems to be the preferred way to go about when swimming. The Reshi are often seen jumping from various heights off ledges of the Tai-na's carapace and plunging into the warm waters of the Reshi Sea below. Reshi don't use chairs, just cushions on the ground. All of their furniture is flat and long rather than tall. It's common to see tents set up at various locations on the backs of the Tai-na. From the perspective of a Thaylen, the Reshi language has been described as sounding like barking. For many Reshi, life on a Tai-na involves fighting when the island fights and relaxing otherwise. This simple lifestyle has led to people from faraway lands seeking out Tai-na to start living the Reshi way. The Reshi of the Tai-na accept these newcomers so long as they give all that they own to the king. Herdazians, Thaylens, and even Alethi can be found living in the Reshi kingdoms on the backs of Tai-na. Not all Reshi choose to live in such a relaxed manner. Indeed, some prefer fighting to lounging and become soldiers. Reshi soldiers still wear the traditional Reshi wraps, but also arm themselves with spears that are adorned with colorful tassels and wear breastplates and arm guards made from carapace, carved wickedly with points. They stand stiff-backed and tend to have stern expressions. When their Tai-na goes to war with another, the Reshi climb down into boats and exchange insults and boasts with the Reshi from the other Tai-na. They start with their weakest members and progress in a verbal duel up to their greatest. It eventually escalates to arrows and spears flying and physical fighting on the ships and in the water, though there's typically a lot more yelling than cutting. The victory of the war goes to whichever side showed the most boldness. The Reshi also see trading as a type of fighting. They only trade with people that they know and trust. Gaining this trust can take as long as a decade unless you impress them with a feat of boldness. The Reshi of the Tai-na are led by a king. They view gender as irrelevant for the position, so whether their monarch is male or female, they are still called a king and referred to with the he and him pronouns. We see in the books that the spouse of a female king is called the king's consort. Though the Reshi Sea has a lot of Tai-na, There are normal islands as well, so not all Reshi live on Tai-na. I saw an interesting theory on the 17th Shard forum while researching for this video by a user named Bryce Carmoni that theorizes the Reshi Isles were perhaps formed from dead Tai-na that collected crim for decades during high storms, eventually becoming full-fledged stationary islands. While I don't think all the Reshi Isles formed this way, I think it's plausible that at least some did. Let me know in the comments what you think of that theory. That concludes this deep dive about Tai-na, the most enormous creatures in the Stormlight Archive. There's plenty more Cosmere content on the way. Be sure to give the video a like, hit the subscribe button, and join me on this journey of exploring the Cosmere.